So we're at the top of the hour. My bit. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for attending my session in which I will be talking about modernizing Exchange scripts. First, a bit about myself. I'm Michel Rooij. I live in the Netherlands. I'm a Microsoft 365 apps and services MVP. I work as a consultant for a company in the Netherlands called Rapid Circle. And if needed, during or after this session, you can reach me on email, visit my website, reach out to me on Twitter, or look at my GitHub, where I'll also be posting script parts which will be demonstrated in this session. And the title of this session is Modernizing Your Exchange Scripts. Now, what do we consider Exchange scripts? In my opinion, and for this session, we'll be restricting it to PowerShell scripts to perform Exchange-related tasks. If you're looking for information on scripting against Exchange or Exchange Online using Exchange Web Services, and there were two excellent sessions yesterday by Julian Stefan and Glenn Skills. I hope I pronounced the names correctly, which talk about that, and also regarding the move to modern authentication and Graph API. So modernizing scripts. Why should you modernize your scripts? And that also concerns things I see in the field out there with customers who have scripts out there running. Sometimes they are aware of the scripts, sometimes they are left behind from other partners who, for example, did the hybrid migration, installed some scripts for certain management tasks. And yeah, why is there now a need to look at the scripts again? That could be because of a technology push. It can also be because of the life cycle of modules or products used in those scripts. And then I'm going to talk about how to approach this situation and how you can methodically solve it and to get yourself ready for the future, so to speak. And I'm also going to quickly touch on next steps, because with all those scripts, there are developments in especially Azure, which allow you to approach things differently or make solutions which work from a different perspective. More on that later. I forgot to mention my excellent friend, Ingo Giggenwatt, who will be answering questions in the chat. So if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and hopefully Ingo will pick them up, or I will then answer them after the session. So about the technology push, as you might be well aware, especially after day one, with all the announcements and the news, is that Microsoft is moving away from basic authentication in Exchange Online, and you need to move your applications and products you use by vendors to configure them to use modern authentication. Basic authentication gets disabled October 22, which is really quickly. You can request additional grace period since recently. That gives you some extra time to get your things in order, and that's especially helpful for customers that are almost there but need some additional time. Technology push also can be triggered by security practices. I see a lot of customers who approach those tasks really simple. They used saved credentials, saved basic authentication credentials located on the machine because it was encrypted by the key, especially for that machine, so nobody could decrypt it. No. Nowadays, it's more common and a best practice to use certificate-based authentication, which means you will use certificates to identify yourself to the service. Managed identity is also coming up. There are some developments in the PowerShell space for using managed identity. They're also there. They're already there with Azure automation, which I hope to show in the end of this session. As mentioned a bit earlier, jobs, remote. There's a lot of customers running scripts locally, have task scheduler with tasks that trigger scripts which connect to Exchange Online, do something. Yeah, that's a bit old-fashioned because you still need to have a server on premises. That could be a virtual machine, but it's still a liability and something you need to be aware of and maintain, because usually they also use credentials, and those credentials could expire, or the password changed, and then you need to go in the job and make sure that the credentials are updated. And later we're going to show how that sort of scenario could be addressed by using Azure automation. Sorry about that. Module life cycles. When using PowerShell, you'll be certainly using PowerShell modules for using certain commandlets, talking to Exchange, for example, or Azure Active Directory. But those modules life cycles can be challenging. I tried to show here in the table where we are coming from and where we are going to. You can see in the early days we only had remote PowerShell. That will stop working. Then at some point we had the Exchange Online module, which was available as a click-to-run PowerShell module, which you could install on your machine, available through the Exchange Admin Center. But that module, for example, doesn't have certificate-based authentication support. And now we have the Exchange Online Management module, which is currently in 2.06 preview 8 since 5 days. But it's still actually in a preview. The same path, more or less, applies also to managing Azure Active Directory. In the beginning, there was only the Amazon Line module, which had a very rich feature set. Then came the Azure AD v2 model. Amazon Line is v1, which was there, but now with the graph movement, everything is moving away from those Amazon Line and Azure AD modules also. Yeah, there's a little push to have customers, but also Exchange administrators move to adopt the MS Graph module for accomplishing those tasks. We'll be mostly talking about the Exchange Online Management module v2 with certificate-based authentication. There are several sessions which already talked about how to set this up. In highlight, it's create a self-signed certificate. You could use the script which is available publicly. It also comes with the Exchange Online Management module somewhere down there in one of those folders after you install it. Then in Azure, you need to create an app registration for the module. The certificate you created in step 1, the public part of it, you need to attached to the app registration. There's also the option to use secrets, but that's not considered a security best practice unless you use conditional access. So we'll only touch on the certificate-based authentication for unattended operations. And then you need to assign permissions to the application registration. And in case of Exchange Online management, you need to assign Exchange Manage as App API permission. You could also, if you're working with Graph, for example, add Graph-related permissions as well to the app. After you set that up, you need to grant admin consent, and then you need to switch to the Azure AD portal rules to grant the service principal, which has been created as part of registering the app, and grant that principal the Exchange administrator role. Then you're done setting things up on the back end. And what you then need to do is from the workstation or the server on which you're running the unattended jobs, you need to install the certificate, including the private key part. Of course, install the Exchange Online Management module. I mention here allow pre-release on because of a reason I will mention in the next slide. And then you can use Connect Exchange Online, use the thumbprint of the certificate to authenticate. You then also need to specify the app ID. That's the application ID that was assigned by Azure to the application after you registered it. And organization is your tenant name. That could be contoso.allmicrosoft.com. That's quick. If you want to see how to set this up with all the screenshots that go with it, follow one of the URLs mentioned below. And then there's a small dilemma for some customers with the Exchange Online Management Module v2 preview versus the GA version, because the GA version is officially still version 2.0.5. That's dated. It was released around May 21, a long time ago. Currently, the preview version is version 8 and already goes by 2.06. And yeah, as you can imagine, in the meantime, lots of things were added to the module, which are not only nice to have, but also might be required to at least manage the things you want to manage in Exchange Online. For example, certificate-based authentication, which was introduced in the Exchange Online Management module version 2 in version 2.0.3, but then in a preview state, went only GA in version 2.0.6 preview 5. It could be confusing with futures going GA in a preview version of the module, but yeah, that is what it is. Since it's a preview version, you should also account for things that toys that are taken from you. For example, in the preview version 7, where all the commandlets were became REST-based and available also as such. It also took away some of the unified group commandlets. The reason for that was there were issues on the back end causing the group maintaining the module to remove those commandlets. Now, the issue with that is if you only have REST-based commandlets, you can, for example, now disable basic authentication in the Win remote management part of your client locally. But if you have a script that does something with unified groups and uses one of those commandlets which were taken away for the time being, you need to fall back to the remote PowerShell mode of the module. Now, the remote PowerShell mode of the module requires basic authentication locally. So then you cannot, you need to enable basic authentication in the WinRM client again and you also need to connect to Exchange Online using connect-exchange online, and then use the switch, use RPS session to use an old-fashioned remote PowerShell session. Then there's talk of, in my slides, of REST-based and REST-backed. What's the difference? The REST-backed commandlets are basically the commandlets you are probably familiar with and love or hate, and they have a counterpart on the back end, and the module translate that, sends that off to the backend, and you basically can use the same commandlet to accomplish the same task. So it's excellent for compatibility, and you don't need a lot of code changing to make that work. The REST-based commandlets have a different prefix. They all start with EXO, and it's only 9 in total. And they are really developed from the ground up with REST in mind. And they are excellent for heavy bulk operations. So they're great for performance reasons. But the output of those commandlets can differ from, they will differ from the REST-backed version of the commandlet. For example, get EXO mailbox. And the last thing is there's so it's only for retrieving information, but in a optimal way for large data sets. Both variants of these commandlets support modern authentication, and they're also built in a way that they are reliable and resilient. So, for example, if you have timeouts or your connection dropped and they need to re-authenticate, they will try to fix that for you. So they re-authenticate, continue your session, and the command works, continues working, and you don't need to make sure that, for example, your session is still active, and all that management around your session is taken care of mostly. Now, how to accomplish this change? When talking to a lot of customers, I see a lot of these comments. So we run a script to manage a partner send connector in EXO, and that management script to modify that connector runs locally on a VM as a scheduled task. Then there's also customers who read the management center bulletins, and then they didn't read properly or they didn't pay attention, and basic authentication goes away, and then are not totally aware of what if they need to do something. And if they need to do something, where do we start? Because customers can have a lot of scripts or have some sort of repository. So how to approach that job? Now, in essence, it comes down to that you need to go through all the scripts. Unfortunately, to bring the bad news is that there's no automatic way to refactor what you So you will need to dive in those scripts because for the change to modern authentication, you need to use different parameters. So there's that. So in the left column, there's the you need to is the command you need to hunt for. So for example, if you see a script where it says connect exchange online dash credential, you know it's using in some way authentication method using basic authentication, and you need to there's somebody off mute having dinner. And you need to translate that to connect dash exchange online with the required parameters for unattended operation using certificate-based authentication. Same goes for the Azure AD set of commandlets. Converting to graph is a different beast because that requires a lot more work. The commands are not totally one-on-one mappable, but luckily there are some smart folks out there who deployed some tools to assist you in this process. And the first one is something which I came up with is to analyze a set of exchange scripts to see if there's, for example, if the basic authentication version of connecting is used in the script, if commands are used which are not supported by REST, because in that case you need to use WinRM and set it to basic authentication. For the conversion of Azure AD to Graph, a guy named Meryl Fernando, I hope I pronounced correctly, Meryl, set up a website with a tool to interactively show you what commandlets it detects. And there's also a module to approach this from a more bulk point. And Microsoft has also some documentation to support you in this this journey. Now I'll show a quick demo of this. This is my demo script. By the way, I will share this on my GitHub later. So first I will set my app ID, my org ID, and I retrieve my certificate thumbprint, which I'm going to use to authenticate to Exchange Online. By the way, I'm doing this live, so pray for the demo gods. Now here I use the thumbprint to connect to Exchange online, but if you call it, there's also a possibility to use an external file with the certificate, then you will need to also provide the password to import that certificate. They are marked out, but this is for reference if you need ever need this way of connecting. And yeah, the same goes basically for Azure Active Directory. Connect using the tenant ID, user certificate thumbprint, and application ID, and you're connected to Azure Active Directory using modern authentication. You might spot here the use Windows PowerShell because I'm using PowerShell 7 and there's an incompatibility with the Azure AD module. So I need to use this switch. Now to demonstrate the resources which I mentioned in one of the slides, I have a folder here. And in that folder, I have some real-world PowerShell scripts for Exchange. And I'm going to fire off my analyze exo script against that demo folder using the org ID, certificate thumbprint, app ID. To make clear, the analyze exos PS1 script the first time you run it, it will connect to Exchange Online using the credentials or the certificate you provided. It will connect using REST-based, and it will connect using remote PowerShell. And those two set of commands, it will store, and based on that information, it will determine which commands are available in REST and which in remote PowerShell. And that information is then sort of cached in the local file. So you will not see that part, but that is what goes on behind the screens if you run it the first time. Now it will use the previously stored information to analyze the scripts in the demo folder. Now, for example, you can see here the transport rule commands are REST-based. These parameters are used. But what is more interesting is if you want to, here I use the same command, but I filter on the type remote PowerShell, and then you will see here clearly pop up the unified group commandlets, which are now only available using remote PowerShell. And those commands are present in the convert DL to OT65 group script on those lines. So if you have that script, you cannot disable basic authentication in WinRM because of this fact. So if at some point Microsoft fixes things on the backend and those commands are available again using REST, then for running the script, you can disable basic authentication on the WinRM client again. So that's the point I'm trying to make. There's also a property alt. It outputs if there's a REST-based commandlet available for a REST-backed commandlet. So, for example, here we have get recipient, which is REST-based. These properties in this script. But you could consider, if, for example, the script is running slowly, you could consider converting that to get EXO recipient. Of course, then you have more work because you need to translate, see if you have all the properties available, which are used later on in the script. But there's a more of a methodology to approach this situation. And then there's also script which in the normal way, when you used to connect without REST, you have a PS session. You could, for example, use the invoke PS session and then your PowerShell session against Exchange Online and then throw a script log. Then you might be interested in spotting all the things involved around PS session in those Exchange-based scripts to see if you need work there, because when you connect using the Exchange Online Management Module V2 using REST, there's no concept of PowerShell session because it's empty. So you need to work around that. Alternatives for that are don't use a reference to PS session because it's the current session. Or alternatively, you could use connect Exchange Online and then use the prefix parameter to make that separation between if you're connected, for example, to two tenants. So if you're connected to tenant A, you can use prefix A, but that creates another problem because then all your commandlets also need to be translated. So that's something you need to think about. And the final example for the analyze XO script is you can also use it to spot scripts which use a connect exchange online commandlet. And then in this case, you see that connect exchange online is present in the sync modern mail public folder script, which is the default public folder synchronization, migration set of scripts. And here you see that it has the credential parameter. So this lets you know that the script uses the connect exchange line to connect to exchange line, but uses a credential. So it's automatically should trigger you that, oh, maybe it uses basic authentication to set up a connection. So I need to dive into that, set up an application, certificate, and make the switch. For the Exchange, that was the Exchange Online part. I also have the this one. This is an excellent website if you are looking to switch from Amazon Line or Azure AD based scripts to Graph. It's also an excellent learning tool, as I found out. And what you can do here is it has an interactive part where you can just copy paste your scripts. And I'm using here the sample code. And what it can then do is analyze and basically does the same as the Exchange script. It decomposes your script and tells you which commands are used in the script. For example, here it have a get Azure AD user, and that needs to be translated to get-mg user in some way. Now, it will also, it's very helpful in getting you to understand what is required. So if you don't have any code, you can use the import module, because when you install the Graph PowerShell module, it's consists of a lot of dependency of individual modules. So this is only the module that's required for this command. Connect to Graph using this scope, and then you need to use get mg user using that filter for that operation. What this excellent site also shows and scrapes from the there's a master table on one of the Microsoft Docs sites, is the permissions required for this operation. So if you create an app, you need to assign permissions for Graph. Which permissions do you need? That depends a bit on in the script you use, because you want to use the least, the minimum set of permissions, of course, to accomplish this task. And this is what is required for that operation. Then I also mentioned the PS Azure Migrator Advisor module, which is more suited for bulk operations. So I have a set of Azure AD based scripts, or which are using part of that uses Azure AD based operations. It's a module you need to install, and what you can then do is, back to my code terminal, is first you import the module, and then again in my demo folder I have several scripts which use Amazon Line and Azure AD. The module has a command read AZ script file, and what it will do if you throw PowerShell files at it is will output the following. It will say which script was analyzed and what was found on what line. It will show, for example, here, that it's found the connect Amazon Line service command, and which in essence needs to be translated to connect mg graph for graph. Of course, this is less helpful than the interactive side, but it's more to assess what needs to be done. And it's also, if, for example, you're working with a team to upgrade these scripts, it can be used as a tool to assign scripts for processing to other people, and this is also a way to keep track of progress. Now you might also notice here in disable plans that there's a new Amazon Online license options command used, but there's no direct counterpart for that in Graph. So in Graph, you need to solve that differently. What you need to do then depends a bit on the command, of course, but in this case, because it's a common scenario, is that you first you need to connect to Graph. In this case, I select the beta profile for Graph. This is more for a get for me to get the currently assigned licenses, and here I make a hash table of the license options I want to apply, the SKU and the disabled plans. In this case, it's Sway. And here, using set MGU's license, as you can see below, I can use set MG user license is the counterpart of set Amazon user license. But in this case with Graph, you can also directly provide a hash table with the plans you want to disable. In Amazon Line module, you need to create an object first with a new Amazon Line license options, and that's the thing you need to pass through to set Amazon user license. So this is more efficient, but it's something which you need to discover, find out how to convert this code. Good. So then for the next step, Azure automation. I talked about all these scripts running on services locally. Some of these scripts run in Task Scheduler. People don't look at it. They're not always aware of it. Is there not another way to accomplish this task? Here is where Azure automation could be a perfect fit. It's well suited for cloud-only headless jobs, so you're not really concerned about the output or need to provide any input. It does require Azure subscription, and it's can be simple to set up, can be complex to set up. What you need to do is create an automation account. Automation account needs to provide a managed identity. Managed identity creates a credential in Azure, but you don't have to worry about managing it. Azure takes care of that. To the automation account, you assign and deploy modules. For example, the Exchange Line Management module. You attach certificates, or you can set variables in the scope of the Azure automation account. So those then are available in the context of things that run from that Azure automation account. And then you can create runbooks and schedule them. You can also go crazy with webhooks to trigger certain jobs that run in Azure then, but you can trigger them from applications, from locally, etc. Yeah, to set this up, create an automation account, managed identity. You also need to add the reader role to the automation account in the resource group it belongs to, so it can view all the elements in your tenant. It needs to see. Similar to the configuring the Exchange Online Management V2 application, also create an Azure AD application for this automation, and then configure the automation account and certificate. One note for the preview modules, you cannot deploy them using the Azure automation user interface. Most easier thing I find is go to the web page of the PowerShell gallery where the preview module is mentioned, and there it have a tab deploy to Azure, and that allows you to deploy from there. And how it looks is on screen, but I can also show it here quickly. Are we on time? Should be good. So here I have my automation account. The modules, these are the default modules which are configured for this account. But here you can see I have deployed the Exchange Online Management module 206. It only reports the version, but it's really the preview 7 version. No credentials. The certificate is the Mac demo certificate I also used earlier to connect from PowerShell. But you can split all this up if security requires. You can also, if you want to abstract information from those runbooks, set variables. In this case, I use the application ID and the organization ID. I encrypted them so you cannot see what their value is, but they're there. And then in the runbook, I created a small script which imports the Exchange Line Management module. Using those variables assigned to the automation account, you need to use the get automation variable. So org ID, application ID. The certificate is also configured on the account. I can retrieve them in the similar way as I use for local PowerShell. So get automation certificate using the subject. And then the command is in essence the same as when you run it from an unattended local PowerShell session. And for the case of this demonstration, I did a silly get mailbox and wrote that to the output. This could take some time, so fingers crossed. I'll continue and go back to this later. The takeaways I want to give you from this session is that conversion, yeah, it requires work. There's unfortunately no automatic way, but due to complexity or yeah, everybody scripts in their own way, has their own way of solving things. Yeah, you need to dive into that. I would, if I would be given the option, I would prioritize modern authentication. Not only is it the deadline is sooner, but also it's more easy regarding in terms of changes you need to make than switching from modules. Review your scripts and processes. Use the sites that can help you, especially if you're starting with graph. It can be can look like a big hill to climb, but there's tools and guides out there to help you with that. Of course, if you want to spot if there's still something using basic authentication, you can use the Azure sign-in logs and then see if some service account is connecting, and then you know that there's something still running which needs to have requires you to have a look at it. Using the Exchange Online Management module for now is still fine, but do get acquainted with the PowerShell Graph SDK, which is the Microsoft Graph PowerShell module. And yeah, if you want to use things for headless operation, certainly I would have a look at Azure Automation to configure those tasks, and you can go totally crazy with it. But the best thing is you don't have to worry about anything local anymore, which is also excellent for organizations that want to get rid of all the local infrastructure. Related sessions today. There's still again a session on the basic authentication deprecation by Greg Taylor and friends. Tony Paul will be talking about EWS, moving EWS apps to Graph. It's probably a bit more developer oriented. Tony will also have Mr. Tony Redmond will have a session on mastering Graph for Exchange PowerShell later today, which will probably also dive into making the move to Graph from your usual Exchange scripts. And yesterday there were also some sessions which are more or less related to this session. So watch those videos. And don't forget to fill in the survey. Now I promised you again one more thing. So as you can see here, my script is completed. It's really silly output, all the mailboxes in this test environment, but it works and you can go crazy here. But yeah, you don't have to look after it. Thank you.